Good afternoon, viewers and listeners. It is a great pleasure to be able to connect with SAAB members and to share some lessons that I have learnt over more than 60 years of involvement in botanical institutions and in biodiversity conservation projects in Southern Africa. I am sorry that this has to be a recorded presentation, as I would love to interact directly with participants, but my internet connectivity here is too unreliable to risk a live connection. I will not be talking about detailed scientific findings of original research or proposing some new botanical phylogenies or ecological hypotheses. I will be focusing on the practical realities of socio-political environments and how unexpected opportunities can be exploited in the development of successful projects. This presentation will cover 3 episodes or phases, each covering 1 or 2 decades, and each within very different socio-political environments. I will commence with a preface and end with some conclusions. Phase 1 describes the development of ecological research capacity in South Africa during the 1970s and 80s. Phase 2 covers the amalgamation of the former Botanical Research Institute with the National Botanical Gardens to form the National Botanical Institute and its transformation into today's SANBI. Phase 3 explains why a long view is essential in a dynamic global system. I will conclude with a synopsis of the elements of strategic opportunism, an approach that has worked well in Southern Africa. Looking back over 60 years of experience in a dozen African countries, one lesson is clear. Good governance of countries and institutions is the most fundamental requirement for success. I therefore wish to preface this presentation with a little bit of social history. Good governance is not a new concept. In 1338, Ambrogio Lorenzetti, an early Renaissance painter, completed 4 large frescoes in the City Hall of Siena, Tuscany. Today, 684 years later, the frescoes continue to dominate the meetings of the City Council. They depict the striking contrasts between a city and a countryside under good and bad governance. Here we see the countryside under good governance. Farmers take their abundant crops to the marketplace against the backdrop of orderly fields of wheat, vineyards, and orchards, a model of harmony and productivity. In stark contrast is the countryside under bad governance. Fields and houses are going up in flames. Bandits roam the hills. Orchards have been destroyed. Farmers lie dead. Hillsides are eroded. A state of disaster prevails. The choice for the political leaders of Tuscany has been clear for over 680 years. Good governance is the only way. Today, Siena and the Tuscan landscapes are as productive and beautiful as they were in Lorenzetti's time. As we have learned at great cost, the lessons of good versus bad governance are highly relevant to the development and sustainability of science institutions and conservation agencies across Southern Africa. Let me now turn to phase 1 of the story, the development of biodiversity programs in Southern Africa over the past 5 decades. During periods of dramatic socio-economic upheaval and uncertainty, how did we manage? Phase 1 of this period covers the 1970s and 80s, the years of grand apartheid, economic and academic sanctions, and the fortress South Africa. Globally, it was a period of great scientific innovation. Leading this was ICSU, the International Council of Scientific Unions, today called the International Science Council. Despite South Africa's political isolation, the ICSU rule of the universality of free movement of scientists permitted some South Africans to attend their meetings. I was fortunate to serve as a member of the steering committees of the International Union of Biological Sciences, the Scientific Committee on Problems of the Environment, and the Species Survival Commission of IUCN. We need to remember what South Africa looked like in the 70s and 80s. P.W. Botha, die Groot Krokodil, was the country's president. Nelson Mandela, the spiritual leader for change, was in prison on Robben Island. What about South African science? Professor Gideon Lowe, a leading zoologist, had the following to say: A sorry state of affairs exists in botany. The state of zoological research and training are, for the most part, unimaginative, outmoded, and quite frankly, mediocre. Lowe's sharp criticism shook his colleagues out of their 1970s comfort zone. Change was needed. Globally, new environmental perspectives were emerging, presented and debated at successive meetings and workshops of the international committees on which I served. Highly significant was the realization that episodes of apparently short-term, irreversible environmental damage might affect future generations because of the momentum already built into the processes involved. Consensus was achieved on a new paradigm, as articulated by Stanford University plant ecologist Hal Mooney in 1975. Hal Mooney emphasized that scientists across the globe must identify environmental problems that lend themselves to solution through international, interdisciplinary, cooperative research. The focus turned to big science projects, such as the International Biological Program, in which South Africa participated in the early 1970s. The thought of such large projects alarmed conventional laboratory researchers of the time. Loners abhorred the thought of multidisciplinary research teams, but the Manhattan Project and the moon landing were not the result of a few garage-scale laboratories. Big ideas, large teams, and generous scales of funding were the order of the day. Back in South Africa, systems ecologist Brian Walker at the University of Witwatersrand was leading the Savannah Ecosystem Project and brought focus to our work. We should, he said, develop a predictive understanding of the structure and functioning of South African ecosystems. Ecology was moving from the descriptive to the predictive. At a workshop which I convened at Olifantskamp, Kruger National Park in 1982, a new pattern of thinking was presented through our review of Kruger Park's wildlife management policies. The workshop came to three conclusions. First, the world is not simple, and things are not always as they seem. Second, in many instances, the obvious response to a problem is not appropriate. It might even produce an effect directly opposite to that intended. Thirdly, the more one tries to prevent change, the more management effort will be needed in the future. Creating new waterholes for thirsty elephants, burning savannas to feed fresh grass growth, and culling thousands of elephants, zebras, wildebeest, and buffaloes had not helped to achieve Sandpark's desired balance of nature. New adaptive management approaches were needed. While environmentalists of the 1970s had been focusing on acid rain, the ozone hole, a possible nuclear winter, and the population bomb, 1986 saw the recognition of climate change and global warming as the greatest threat to the environment and to humanity. What is remarkable is that today, nearly 40 years later, some politicians still question the reality of global warming. In South Africa, the CSIR took the lead in responding to these emerging environmental challenges. A national program for environmental sciences was established, the forerunner of today's SAAB. A dozen international symposia and workshops were convened, bringing world leaders in interdisciplinary research together with a new generation of local students. These workshops were not talk fests. They produced a series of synthesis volumes on topics that soon dominated and continue to dominate our ecological research agenda. They provided an African context and novel insights into globally important topics previously dominated by narrow northern temperate experience. A snapshot of some of the rising stars of that period demonstrates the demography of researchers at that time. Young students and their mentors, many of whom are both national and global leaders in research and conservation today. The early initiatives of the Savannah, Fynbos, invasive biota, fire ecology, and similar projects led inevitably to a much larger investment in environmental research and management through today's SAAB program. From the 1970s and 80s three key lessons were learned that guided not only the biological sciences, but also our socio-economic outlook over the following decades. These included: be awake to new paradigms, embrace change, think globally, act locally. We will return to these topics later in the conclusion of this presentation. I'll now turn to the second phase of change, institutional transformation through the 1990s. This has special interest to botanists, as it involved the amalgamation of the two oldest botanical institutions in Africa, the Botanical Research Institute, established in 1903 and based in Pretoria, with the National Botanical Gardens, established in 1913 and based at Kirstenbosch, Cape. These in turn were expanded from a focus on botany to the broad embrace of all aspects of biodiversity research and conservation. I will illustrate four elements that contributed to the transition through the 1990s: scenarios of hope, good luck and good timing, strategies versus plans, and risk management. Once again, a flashback to the global scene is needed. In 1989, change was in the air. Gorbachev was president of the USSR. The Berlin Wall fell, and F.W. de Klerk became South Africa's president. The foundations of society and of the world were shifting. Change was facilitated by new thinking. In South Africa, a hopeful future was championed by scenario planners, most effectively by Clem Sunter, who reminded us that the future is not what it used to be. One must note that there is an important distinction between predictions and scenarios. Science-based predictions seek to reduce uncertainty. Socioeconomic scenarios provide plausible stories that reduce complexity. Politicians and the public are influenced by scenarios, not science. Clem Sunter's books have sold several 100,000 copies. How many scientists have had such success in their publications? The 1990s saw a great leap forward, not only the end of the Cold War or the release of Nelson Mandela and other political prisoners, but also the establishment of major environmental policies, programs, and institutions, such as the United Nations Conference on the Environment and Development in Rio 1992, the Global Environment Facility, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and the Framework Convention on Climate Change. In South Africa, the National Biodiversity Act established SAAB. In a global environment of change, other, more personal factors are key: good luck and good timing. The concept was recognized by South African golfing star Gary Player, who admitted that the harder I work, the luckier I become. 200 years earlier, English traveller and philosopher Horace Walpole introduced the term serendipity, the skill of recognizing something valuable that one is not looking for. In 1854, French microbiologist Louis Pasteur remarked, "In the fields of observation, chance favors only the prepared mind." Alexander Fleming's chance discovery of penicillin is a classic example of serendipity. Serendipity is not part of the scientific method, but it is part of the real world. Good luck and good timing came our way in 1962, when I was told by a fellow student that a vacation post was available at Natal Herbarium. It was the start of a very long association with what eventually became SAAB. The job was well paid. My salary slip for the month of July came with a check of 56 Rand 61 cents. At a time when university fees, including accommodation and meals, came to 40 Rand per month, I was a happy worker. In early 1990, Bruce Campbell organized the meeting of African botanists in Maputo, Mozambique. Our planning session, which concluded on 11th February 1990, established what became SAABnet. The auspicious coincidence of the day of Mandela's release from prison and agreement by African botanists on a program of collaboration with South African botanists could not have been a better mix of good luck and good timing. Fieldwork is one of the most important and inspiring steps in the development of biologists. Here young botanists display the products of a SAABnet field trip in Malawi. The Huila expedition in southwest Angola was the first opportunity for Angolan students to work in the field after 30 years of civil war. An expedition to the Congo Basin of far northeast Angola collected over 60 new species records for the country in just 6 days of fieldwork. I now wish to move from the global and regional perspectives to a local history of botany and botanical institutions, using the Kirstenbosch experience as a model. In 1811, William Burchell, for me the father of South African ecology, took a walk up the southern slopes of Table Mountain. He recorded, "The beauty here displayed to the eye could scarcely be represented by the most skillful pencil." He proposed that the site was ideal for a national botanical garden. A century later, in 1911, Harold Pearson, the first professor of botany at UCT, proposed the establishment of a network of national botanical gardens. He outlined in great and prescient detail what such an institution should achieve. In 1913, Kirstenbosch was established as the first of South Africa's 10 national botanical gardens. For much of the 20th century, Kirstenbosch and the National Botanical Gardens struggled with financial difficulties. Successive grandiose master plans and development plans were commissioned, but failed to attract funding. In 1991, a colourful 8-page brochure outlining an ambitious but phased fundraising campaign was published. Within 5 years, funding, mainly from the private sector, was raised to build the infrastructure that Kirstenbosch required to become world-class in status. Long documents do not necessarily raise support. A 2-page letter and a short annex raised the 20 million rand needed to build the Centre for Biodiversity Conservation and complete the Kirstenbosch Research Centre. Physical infrastructure made possible a consolidation of the NBI research program at Kirstenbosch. This responded to global and national priorities in biodiversity conservation, climate change, and land degradation. The development of great careers in applied sciences followed. The botanists, horticulturists, gardens, herbaria, and libraries of the NBI were great repositories of information. But as famous Yale biologist E.O. Wilson remarked at the time, "We are drowning in information while starving for wisdom. The world henceforth will be run by synthesizers, people who are able to put together the right information at the right time, think critically about it, and make important choices wisely." Some more SAAB synthesis volumes. These are the products of the collaboration of hundreds of researchers from dozens of institutions. All are great syntheses of once inaccessible information. All are available via the SAAB website. An unexpected opportunity for Kirstenbosch arose when a new color variant of the NBI logo, Strelitzia reginae, was available to name after our national icon, Nelson Mandela. President Mandela graciously came to Kirstenbosch to receive a portrait of the plant, to be known as Mandela's Gold, and living specimens to be planted at his official residence. He soon became a great promoter of Kirstenbosch, to his many guests visiting him in the Cape. The class of 1984 was presented in an earlier slide. Here's the class of 2017. Note the number and demographics of the biodiversity professionals attending a SAAB workshop. Thousands of potential botanists visit Kirstenbosch every year. Here is the future class of 2040. Transformative change happens because calculated risks are taken. In 1992, introducing concerts and Zimbabwean sculptures to Kirstenbosch attracted much criticism from some conservative groups. One soon learned that the greatest risk is not to take risks. Financial growth underpinned institutional success. Kirstenbosch was 90% dependent on government funding in the 1980s. By 2010, it was operating at a profit. Many lessons were learned from Kirstenbosch and used across the NBG network and for wider application in the development of SANBI. Pertinent to the process were the words of German philosopher Friedrich Hegel. Nothing great in the world has ever been achieved without passion. I'll now turn to phase 3. While good governance is the most fundamental driver of success, taking the long view is needed in a dynamic world. We recall the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Soviet Union, and the end of apartheid. But as a student in the 1960s, I had no awareness of global warming. I did not see it coming, nor did the world just 1 month ago see Putin coming. Short-term life experience of politics and short-term experiments in biology are of very limited predictive value. A long view and wide experience is essential. Here are the words of the young Charles Darwin, written at the end of his 4-year circumnavigation of the globe on HMS Beagle, are instructive. In conclusion, it appears to me that nothing can be more improving to a young naturalist than a journey to distant countries. The effect ought to be to teach him good-humoured patience, freedom from selfishness, the habit of acting for himself, and of making the best of every occurrence. This takes me back to 1965, when as a young BSc graduate, I headed south to Marion Island to spend 15 months on the island as botanist to the first biological geological expedition to the Prince Edward Islands. Here we have the Marion Island team, led by paleoecologist Professor Eduard van Zinderen-Bakker. We may look like a village soccer team, but these were the days before Gore-Tex weatherproof clothing. The expedition ran on a budget of 30,000 Rand for a 2-year program. The new research station on Marion Island cost 30,000 Rand per day to operate. Today there are more cooks, diesel mechanics and storemen on the base than there are scientists. In the winter of 1965, meteorologist Fred Clements and I became the first persons to summit the highest peak of Marion. The photo I took was interesting, as it illustrated an ice plateau lying below the peak. At the time, and for several decades later, I had no idea of the significance of the photo. In 2009, further photos at the same time of year were taken from the highest peak. The 2009 photos revealed the disappearance of the ice plateau. Linked to temperature and rainfall records since the 1950s, the photos give convincing evidence of climate change at this oceanic island, isolated by over 2,000 kilometers from any continent. Long-term records are key to understanding global dynamics. 2 simple photos reveal more insight into the direct impacts of climate change than many dozens of sophisticated computer models. Another startling long-term change that I have observed is that of Angola's national emblem, the giant sable. I got to know this magnificent antelope in the early 1970s when I was ecologist to the national parks of Angola. At that time, the giant sable population was estimated at over 2,500 animals. From the 1980s to the early 2000s, the giant sable population disappeared from sight due to the violent civil war. It was believed to be extinct. But in 2002, trap cameras set by Angolan researcher Pedro Vaz Pinto recorded not giant sable, but hybrids of sables and roan antelope. The absence of male sables had resulted in roan males breeding with the isolated group of sable cows. The story is too long to relate here, but it has a happy ending. Single-handedly, Pedro Vaz Pinto discovered a remaining isolated population of pure giant sables and captured and translocated them to form a viable breeding herd. And today, 20 years of blood, sweat and tears later, the giant sable population is over 150 strong. Pedro's work is an example of what Sir David Attenborough said a few years ago. You can form all the committees, all the societies, all the working groups, all the charities you like, but you know that in the end, it is that one individual that has its passion, that one individual that has fire in his belly, that one individual that is determined that something should be done. The last example of the importance of the long view is that of South Africa's response to the problem of invasive plants. In 1980, the Fynbos project hosted an international MedCon workshop in Hermanus. The idea was mooted for an international project on biological invasions. A synthesis was a first step, but the level of funding needed to transform research findings into a controlled program only arose in the 1990s, when political change and the innovative leadership of Guy Preston turned a science-based idea into millions of rands of investment in the Working for Water program. The rest is history. I hope this presentation provides insights into what works in Africa. I call it strategic opportunism. So what is strategic opportunism? It is certainly not something one would learn in a science curriculum. To explain what I mean by the concept, I need to mention some of its key elements. Firstly, the matching of unexpected opportunities to a strategic framework to achieve a shared vision. Second, responding to weak governance systems and adapting to uncertainty and change. Third, developing a non-linear, opportunistic succession of bold actions. And fourth, getting things done on the ground. In a little more detail, here are the lessons learned as cornerstones of strategic opportunism. First, think big, start small. When the National Botanical Gardens were amalgamated with the Botanical Research Institute in 1990, a new corporate strategic plan was prepared. A primary goal was to become a world leader in botanical institutions. Many of the wary and disillusioned staff were cynical of the goal, saying that this was too ambitious and basically not achievable. When the World Botanic Congress met in St. Louis, Missouri in 1998 and voted Kirstenbosch one of the magnificent 7 botanical gardens of the world, the detractors changed their pessimistic outlook. Second, think globally, act locally. In developing the NBI research strategy, the parallel development of strategies of the Convention of Biological Diversity, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Global Environment Facility, and similar intergovernmental institutions provided opportunistically the guidance needed to match global policies with local needs. NBI was thus able to match its research agenda to the new priorities of post-apartheid government in terms of the basis for its law reform process, including guidance to the National Environmental Management Act. NBI could thus be a leader rather than a follower in biodiversity strategies. Third, apply successive approximation. Seeking a perfect outcome is often counterproductive. When I joined CSIR in 1975, my first task was to edit the early red data books. Looking back, they were fairly crude assemblages of information, but they stimulated a process of revision and improvement. All have gone through multiple editions, improving in each iteration. South Africa today has the best red data books in the world, if not only Africa. Fourth, tolerate mistakes, learn by doing. In any career, one makes mistakes. Recognize that a key component of mentoring is forgiving mistakes. My boss at CSI told me never to tell him of my mistakes. I should rather tell him of my solutions to my mistakes. Fifth, build invisible colleges, a critical mass of passionate people. The best example of an invisible college is the Fynbos Forum, an informal network of like-minded people of diverse backgrounds, but with a common vision for a unique biome. Sixth, exploit good luck and good timing, the political moment. No team has exploited the political moment better than the drivers of the Working for Water program, an extended science team led by Guy Preston's political skills. Seventh, use cooperative, multi-stakeholder approaches. When the bioregional planning concept was initiated in the late 1990s, only a handful of people understood what it was about. Today, the network numbers over 200 participants. Eighth, take calculated risks and apply adaptive management. The Olifantskamp workshop in 1982 questioned SANPark's policies on large mammal management. Out of this, a new paradigm of adaptive management has grown. Ninth, find keystone individuals to lead change. When we started the Savannah Ecosystem Project and the Fynbos Biome Project in the 1970s, botanical and ecological community was dominated by a dozen conservative and aging professors, with a few progressives such as Brian Walker and Roy Siegfried. But a new generation of free thinkers emerged. Kruger, Cowling, Bond, Frost, Scholes, Van Wilken, Richardson, Mentis, Owen-Smith, Midgley, MacDonald, and many more. They, championed by international leaders such as Mooney, De Castri, Diamond, Raven, Cody, and others, have provided the foundations to our current and world-class professional team. It has been a remarkable journey to travel with such outstanding colleagues and friends. So into the last lesson, a personal comment. Next slide. In witnessing the changing fortunes of countries and institutions across Southern Africa over the last 5 or 6 decades, I have been convinced that one must take the long view on science and conservation outcomes. For this, 2 characteristics are essential. Be long-lived, be patient. Obrigado, siyabonga, thank you.